Welcome to Following. Join us each week as we explore practical ways to follow Jesus in everyday life. Christianity is not an event you attend, it's a life you live. Come along with us as we explore specific and concrete examples of how to do everything that Jesus commanded. This podcast is a weekly discussion of the intersection of the ever-changing situations of life with the unchanging Word of God. Come, follow Jesus with us.
Now Simon Peter was standing and warming himself. They said therefore to him, "You are not also one of his disciples, are you?" He denied it and said, "I am not." One of the slaves of the high priest, being a relative of the one whose ear Peter cut off, said, "Did I not see you in the garden with him?" Peter therefore denied it again, and immediately a cock crowed. John 18:25-27.
All right, welcome back to another episode of Following. Bill, it's good to be here with you this morning. How are you?
It is a good day. It's a beautiful
Sun's
day.
shining, yeah. It's still a little cold, but it was
A little
warm.
chilly. That's why we have coffee.
I've got my pitcher of water. So
Yes, you do.
all right, so we're in John 18. You know, we're almost done with John 18.
We are.
I just noticed that yesterday. How
We're almost done with John in total.
excuse me, yeah, John, not just John 18, but yeah,
Yeah.
John. So, why don't you just kind of summarize this?
Did we start the following with John's gospel?
No,
Are you sure?
I'm sure.
I feel like
don't
we
know.
did.
Listeners,
That was
correct
a
me.
long time ago.
Correct me if I'm wrong. I can't think of what we did, what we started it with.
I think we started with John because you were concerned that it would be the same thing every week. I don't remember.
Anyway, okay, yeah. So we're almost done with John. And then, do you have any
I
insight
do.
on where we're going next?
Yeah, but I'm not going to tell you.
Okay.
Well,
Okay.
there's a series, a summer. It's a topical series, so the texts are chosen kind of
Mhm.
based on this idea of learning from Jesus to kind of explore what that looks like. And then at the end of the summer, as we go into fall, we'll jump into the book of James. And so
Okay.
the book of James will take us through the fall up to Christmas. So
Cool.
that's where we're headed.
All right. Yeah. Well, so for this episode, though, we're talking about humility. Where this idea that you made, this point that you made in your sermon, Jesus reveals himself as the suffering servant, right? The one who came not to be served, but to serve, right? And to give his life a ransom for many. So maybe just kind of introduce this passage and then why we're honing in on this one point.
Okay. So John 18 is the arrest of Jesus. And I think John does a very interesting take on the arrest. He's focusing in on the fact that Jesus is in control. Jesus is the high priest who's bringing himself to the altar of the cross to give himself up as a propitiation sacrifice for sinners. And you can see this emphasized in different ways. Like he's the one laying his life down. No one's taking it from him. He's not a victim. He's not a murderer in that sense. He's not being taken advantage of. Jesus is in control of this whole scenario. And as you get to so you see these kind of points being laid out there that emphasize the cross, that emphasize the purpose behind his death being the sacrifice that absorbs the wrath of God. All of this, you come down to this last point, which is Peter's denial. And John's telling of that is very clipped, very short, very succinct. And he kind of removes all of the emotional aspects from it. He doesn't talk about Peter going and weeping. He doesn't talk about Peter seeing Jesus look at him and when he utters that final denial. He doesn't talk about the cursing and the swearing that Peter did. It's just a very clipped, short account. And I think, in light of everything else that John is teaching us about the control of Christ, the emphasis on the work of Christ, I think the point being made is Jesus doesn't need Peter to die for him. Because if you go back to chapter 13, that's the last time Peter speaks before his denial. In chapter 13, at the end of that chapter, Peter says, "Lord, why can I not follow you right now? I will lay down my life for you." Those are the final words that Peter speaks before we end up in the courtyard where he denies Jesus. And Jesus said, will you lay down your life for me? Truly, truly, I say to you, a cock shall not crow until you deny me 3 times. So there's this contrast between Jesus and Peter. And Peter's saying, I will lay down my life for you. And Jesus is saying, no, I need to lay down my life for you. And I don't think Peter's a coward. I think Peter gets a bad rap for being a coward. I mean, he's, other than the other disciple who's probably John, we don't know for sure, but all the other ones just fled. They didn't, but Peter went where Jesus was at, putting himself at risk again. And his denials may be motivated by fear, probably were at some level, but also he could have been motivated by an effort to get Jesus out, if he's trying to conceal his true motives. So we don't really know, and I don't know that it's good to kind of speculate on those things. I just don't think Peter's a coward.
Yeah. I mean, he tried to take on several Roman guards.
Yeah. I mean, he drew a sword and was prepared to go to fight against professional killers. And so I think Peter's confused, though. I think Peter is still in this mentality that I have to protect Jesus. I have to take care of Jesus. Jesus needs me to serve him. He's the king, and he's thinking about the kingdom of God the way we think about power and control and, authority in this life, whereas the one in authority is to be served by everybody else. But Jesus says, no, in the kingdom of God, it's the other way around. The one who is in control, the one who has authority is given that responsibility then to serve others. Jesus said, I didn't come to be served, but to serve and to give my life as a ransom for many. Jesus needed to lay down his life for Peter because Peter needed to be saved. Jesus didn't need to be saved by Peter. Jesus is the all-sufficient God of heaven who fills up our emptiness, who fills up our lack. And Peter didn't understand that, I don't think. And I think a lot of us don't understand that either. I think we think, Jesus saved me because I have potential and I need to serve Jesus. I need to be the one that fulfills the Great Commission. I need to be the one that reaches my street. I need to be the one that, if I'm not doing this class, nobody else is going to teach this class. I've got to give to Jesus all these things. And we may never say it outwardly. We may not even consciously think it, but the thoughts do come like I'm indispensable to Jesus. I am necessary for Jesus. And if it's not me, it's just not getting done. The reality is that's not true. And I think that kind of mentality hinders the work of God in your life and in your heart. It's a pride. It's a declaration that Jesus is not sufficient in and of himself, but that you are, and that you fill up what is lacking in Jesus, when the reality is he is the bread of life. He is the water of life. And it is he who satisfies, not the other way around. And I fear that many times we forget that. And I think a meditation on our sinfulness and Jesus' saving work helps to anchor us back into the reality. I am not the one serving. I am the one that has been served by Christ. I don't love first. He loved me first, and I respond and reciprocate from that love, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and this is not to say that we don't serve. I mean, we've done a few different episodes now on how to practically serve in the course of this podcast, and so we're not saying that you just shouldn't serve,
right?
But I think what you're getting at is the position of your heart in service.
Why are you serving? What's the motive here? What is it you're trying to accomplish by the serving?
Yeah, and you mentioned that this is pride. That like the root here is a prideful heart. And maybe just elaborate a little bit on that. What does it look like, maybe more practically, to have this kind of prideful thinking, being self-sufficient and relying on yourself for whatever? What does that look like? And maybe how do we root out, or how do we recognize this in our hearts?
Prayerlessness.
Okay.
I think is a huge signal that we are far more dependent upon ourselves than we need to be or should be. If you notice in this whole farewell discourse, how much Jesus emphasizes prayer, that part of the proof of our discipleship is the answer of prayer. Prayer being answered, us being able to do more than Jesus did while on earth. All of these things are tied into prayer. And I think what prayer does is it glorifies the sufficiency of God, because we're calling out to God and saying, I am in need of you. And God is glorified in satisfying that need. But when we don't pray, we don't think we need God. We'll let God handle those people over there. They need God more than I do. I've got this taken care of. We don't want to ask for help because it's humiliating. And it's humiliating because we have to admit in the asking that I can't take care of myself, that I can't do this in my strength, that I am not powerful enough to handle this situation. And for many of us, whether we consciously think those thoughts or not, our prayerlessness is screaming that.
Mm-hmm.
And, I know that I've been guilty of that even in pastoral ministry of, we've got to go and we've got to do all this ministry. We've got to get all these things done, and we've got to knock on every door. And we've got to, and doing those things are not bad. It's the attitude from which I do them and the prayerlessness from which I do them. Prayer is the fundamental work of the Christian.
Mm-hmm.
It's what we are to be doing.
Yeah, especially in the pastoral. Like, I think this is a few weeks ago, you preached in Acts chapter 6,
Mm-hmm.
where they set aside the deacons, and they did that so they could focus on prayer and the ministering the word.
Mm-hmm.
Those two things were vitally important.
Right.
I think another prayerless is one, and I think another indication that you have this pride is anxiousness.
Yes.
I was preaching in 1 Peter last night to the students, and in 1 Peter 5, I think it's 6 and 7, it says, therefore humble yourselves before the mighty hand of God, and he will exalt you at the proper time, having cast all your anxieties on him because he cares for you. And I think Peter is connecting this being humble directly leads to being able to cast your anxieties onto the Lord because he cares for you.
Yeah.
And if you are riddled with anxiety, constantly worrying about finances or what's going to happen next week, whatever it is, there's plethora of things you could be anxious about. But if you have that constant just anxiousness, unrest in your soul, you probably are not humbling yourself before the Lord. And I had to make this distinction with the students. That I'm not talking about like there's real medical condition type anxiety that. And that's one side, like there's actual imbalances in the brain, and that's a real thing. I'm not a psychologist, not here to diagnose that. What I'm saying is this constant worry and fear of the future, fear of things that are outside of your control. If you continually have that issue going on, then probably you need to search the position of your heart and see if you have this pride of self-sufficiency.
I just want to say to that, I think I understand your caveat, but I think most anxiety, almost all of it, is not related to some kind of medical issue. I think it's more, anxiety is fear. And where does fear come? Fear comes from the potential of harm or negative, results happening in your life because you realize you can't control the situation. We try to control the situation to bring about the end that we think would be best. And when we realize that we are actually not in control and the situation may spin out of control into a negative way, that's where brings the fear and the anxiousness. And that anxiousness is the opposite of confidence in God. Yeah. It's our confidence is in ourself and our ability to control. And when reality smacks us in the face and we realize I am not in control, there's where anxiety and fear are birthed. And I think by casting upon the Lord, by trusting in the Lord, by relying on God through the vehicle of prayer, you begin to experience peace because you begin to say, I don't have to be in control. I'm not in control. That's an illusion anyway. Yeah. God is in control, and God is working all things together for my good. I trust him. Doesn't mean nothing painful will ever happen. Lots of painful things will happen, but I'm trusting God through that, and thus the anxiousness goes away. Is it something that evaporates immediately? No. I think when you've trained your heart to be anxious and dependent upon self, it takes some time to kind of work out that and retrain your heart to be confident in God. But the way that you do that is through constant, continual prayer. I mean, in Philippians 4. I think it's in Philippians 4 where he talks about do not be anxious about anything, but in everything by prayer and supplication, let your requests be made known to God. So the antidote to anxiety is not a pill so much as it is a prayer. Continual turning of your heart to God in prayer, being confident in God, trusting in his wisdom and in his goodness, trusting in his promises. And I think you will reap a reward of that humility of heart that says, I need God, and help me, God, with these things over and over again. You're going to experience that peace as you cast your anxiety upon him. So I think prayer is fundamental. And I think anxiety, constant anxiousness in your heart is another symptom. Like, I think you're exactly right. I think we tend to just focus on ourselves so much. Like, what occupies your mind? Like, what are you thinking about as you go throughout the day? And I think for many of us, if not most of us, we think about ourselves. We think about, how is this going to benefit me? How is this going to make my day worse? How is this going to make my day better? What can I do to get some relaxation, to get some rest? I mean, our thoughts, and it's not necessarily wrong to think about those things. What I'm saying is, what occupies the majority of your thought life? Is it thoughts about self, or is it thoughts about God? And I think the more we think about self, the more confident we are in self, thus the more anxious we become. The more we think about God, the more confident in God we become, and the less anxious we become. And we have to retrain our brains to think about
this. This kind of reminds me of this story in the Old Testament, and you'll have to help me get the details right. But Israel sends the 12 spies into the land of Canaan, and all but 2. Who were the 2 spies that?
Caleb and Joshua.
And they were confident that they could take the land, and they wanted to go, but the rest of them did not want to, because these men were huge, were grasshoppers compared to them, I think is what they said. And I think that the difference is that the rest of the spies were confident in themselves, whereas Joshua and Caleb were confident in the Lord. The Lord said go.
Yeah, and they believed.
Yeah.
The others did not believe.
Yeah.
And he tells us in Hebrews that generation failed to enter into the rest of God because of unbelief. So their disobedience to go in and take the land was flowing from a heart of unbelief. They didn't trust God to give them the land. They didn't trust God to overcome their enemies. They didn't trust God to give them the victory, even in the face of hard circumstances. Whereas Joshua and Caleb did. They were completely confident in God. They remembered what God did to the Egyptians, and they knew that he was more powerful than these giants in the land. And so they trusted the Lord. And as a result, they did enter the land. Nobody else in that generation did, but they did. And that's a good analogy, that when your fixation is on yourself, you will realize at some point very quickly that you really don't have the strength to take care of that stuff. And that's where fear and anxiety come from. But when you focus on God, and prayer is a good way to keep your focus on God. It's not the only way. I think it's a good way, the primary way. But you begin to grow in confidence in God. Your heart begins to rest in the sovereignty and the supremacy of God over all things, and you can be at rest even in the midst of troubling circumstances. You don't have to be a mess of fear and anxiousness and worry and panic and stress, because God is in control, and you're not, and you trust him. And so I think that's what I would encourage you to do today as a listener, is just focus on, how can I increase my prayer life? And if you go about it kind of haphazardly, like, I need to pray more, but you don't plan to pray more, you won't pray more. For me, I had to start setting alarms on my phone to remind me to pray through the day. I kept saying for a long time, I've been saying, I want to pray more. I want to pray more. And I would do it for 2 or 3 days, and then I would just slide back into the old patterns of, not praying very much. And that was just not okay. And so this year, one of the things I've tried to do is every day I set alarms on my phone for the amounts of time that I want to pray. And when the alarm goes off, I do my best to find a place to pray. Sometimes I just, as I'm driving down the road, I just pray. But what I have noticed is my heart is turning back to God, and I'm thinking about God more, and it's been good. And I'm going to keep doing this because I think it's been really helpful for me. And so I would encourage you to do the same. Find a way, make a plan. How can I increase my praying throughout the day? And then secondly, when it comes to worrying and stressing and being, those kinds of things, you have to increase your thoughts of God. So if you notice that you're constantly thinking about yourself, what can you do, practically speaking, to increase thoughts of God? For me, reading is indispensable. Like you say, well, I'm not a reader. Become a reader.
Yeah.
I don't think that's a legitimate excuse. You can listen to books, you can read books, and you don't have to be a fast reader. I'm not saying you have to read a book every week or something like that. But make it a discipline of your life. I'm going to read for 10 minutes every day. I'm going to read for 15 minutes every day, and just increase that time. And I think what you will find is that your ability to read will begin to grow. Because like anything else, it's almost like a muscle that you exercise. Your phone has conditioned your brain to be distracted and to be constantly needing to just move from one video to the next. And you're watching of television, all of those things, they do all the work for you. Your brain does not have to engage and track an argument. And that's why reading has become really boring to you. Mm-hmm. So the only way to overcome that is to actually read and make it a discipline in your life. And I think what you will find is that you begin to look forward to that reading because it's enriching to the soul. But read good books. Read books that make you think about God. And what I'm trying to say is you need to increase your thinking about God and decrease your thinking about self. So you have to make a plan, whether it's in prayer or reading. Memorizing scripture is another way to increase thinking about God. So those are just some practical advice I would encourage you, so that we do not have this overconfidence in self, but rather remember He came to serve us because we desperately need Him. We need His sufficiency to fill us. He doesn't need us in that regard.
That's probably a good place to wrap this episode up. We hope that you've enjoyed this episode and found it helpful. I would encourage you to meditate on the scriptures and think about God. Retrain your mind to think about God, the person of Christ, and depend on Him. And don't think too highly of yourself. That's one of the things I was telling the students last night is one thing that humility looks like is recognizing your station, like who you are before God. And just leaning on Him and depending on Him for all things. So with that, until next week, keep following Jesus. Thank you for listening to this week's episode. We hope you found it helpful and practical. Follow, subscribe, like, and share this podcast with others. If you would like to hear more on this biblical text, click the link in the description below. Check out hopeformacon.com for more resources to help you in following Jesus.